Okay, I want to walk through the steps of hand graphing the secant graph. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of rewriting. And I'm going to turn this into y equals 2 plus 1/4 secant. And I'm going to pull the 1/2 out, meaning this x minus, pull the 1/2 out, 2 pi. Now the reason I did that is because then from here I can pull all my information out. So this is my vertical translation. This is my amplitude change. This is my period. And this is my phase shift or horizontal translation. Okay? So when you do look at these, you do need to make sure that the x has a coefficient of 1. If it doesn't, you need to pull that out, because if you don't, you will have the wrong phase shift. Okay? Now, what I'm going to do when I graph secant, I'm going to use cosine as a guide graph. So I'm going to start with y equals 1/4 cosine 1/2 x. Now, the period then is, instead of 2 pi, it's going to be 4 pi. Okay, because I'm doubling it. That's what this period does. I'm really doing 2 pi. I hate that when I do that. What I'm doing is I'm doing 2 pi divided by 1/2, which is the same as timesing by 2, so then my period is 4 pi. So when I graph that, and this is then going to allow me to graph this. And what I'm doing is I'm just building. I'm starting kind of with the smallest thing, and usually what I do is I start with the amplitude and the period, and then I'm going to add in the phase shift, and then I'm going to add in the vertical translation. I'm going to do it one step at a time. When you do your trig assignment, you're going to see that I'm going to require you give me each step. What I'm looking for is that you understand how each one affects it. So when I graph this, I'm going from, so this is going to mean I'm going to go from negative 1/4 to 1/4, and I'm going to go pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi. Okay, so this is, and I'm going to start up here because this is cosine. I'm going to go here, 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 here. So this is 1 of cosine, which means that then secant looks like this. I'm just filling in, remember, so that the asymptotes are going to be at where the x-intercepts were on the original cosine graph, and then each of the humps, the peaks, the mins and maxes, are where your parabolas are going to take off, and you're really just filling them in so that they match, they're filling out to the asymptotes. Okay. And one full period is going to be one upper and one lower. So if I was looking for a period, I would be looking for, say, here to here. This would be one period, depending on how you do it. I usually end up with 3. I kind of like that look, but you need to make sure you get at least one full period. Now, from this, I am then going to add in my phase shift. So what I'm doing on my phase shift is I'm taking each of these original points, so 0, pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, and 4 pi, and I'm adding 2 pi. So this is pretty easy. 0 plus 2 pi equals 2 pi, pi plus 2 pi equals 3 pi, and so on. Okay, so I'm actually going to move over, and I'm going to start, and this is going to go through 6 pi. So when I graph this, kind of got a little here, I'm kind of making this as my jog. I'm going to start out here at 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi, 5 pi, and 6 pi. And now if you don't want to start all the way out here, you could certainly kind of trace this back. Now I'm going, remember, from 1/4 to negative 1/4. And so now remember, I started over here, down here, down here, down here. So then this is my guide graph. Badly drawn, but there. And then my secant graph, there's going to be there's the x-intercepts, that's going to be my asymptotes. And then I'm going to have parabolas going off here. Okay, so at this point, I have graphed in orange. What I have is I have the graph of 1/4 secant, 1/2 x minus 2 pi. So I've got everything except the vertical translation. Now I leave the vertical translation to last because once I do that, I can't use my x-intercepts anymore as where my asymptotes are. So if I graph everything else first, I can use that as my guide to where my asymptotes are going to be. Once I do that vertical shift, I'm going to lose that little helpful guide. So that's the reason I do it last. So my last one is I am moving everything up. Okay? And so again, I want both of these. I'm going to graph cosine 1/2 x minus 2 pi. So when I come to graph this, okay, now I'm going to do this way, okay? So here's still my jog, and I'm going to start here at 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi, 5 pi, 6 pi. But now I've moved everything up. So I was at -1/4. So -1/4 plus 2 gives me 1.75. Now, I'm going to also put 2 in. So this right here, this is where my x-intercepts were, okay? I'm moving that up too, and that's going to give me a sense of where those middle points are going to be. So this one starts up here, okay? And now this one's here at 2. This one's down here at 1.75, back up, and I'm going to end back here. So this, and I'm doing this as dotted now. This is my guide graph, okay? And then in red here, so let's see here. So this is here, I'm kind of off on my thing. There's my asymptotes. And then here are my parabolas. And so there we go. Now you can see here, we're not going to worry about solving for these right now. Once we learn to solve, we'll talk about. But you can see I actually would have x-intercepts on this because I've had this vertical translation. And so any of the lower parabolas are actually going to hit the x-intercept. In our basic graph, we don't. So then our range is going to just be missing this 1.75 to 2.25 chunk, and it's going to have everything else. And then, of course, our domain is going to skip where each of our asymptotes are. Now, if you were going to graph this, then what you'd end by doing is just simply, oh, it didn't like that. So I'm not going to do that again. But, where'd the graph go? By erasing the guide graph on your last thing. But I use that up until the end because that lets me know where each of the pieces are going to be. I find when I'm hand graphing, I need that guide graph to be able to tell me where each of the pieces go. And you can see here that by doing the vertical translation, it made it easy to find the x-intercepts, the asymptotes for the graph. So hopefully that helps you. As you walk through these, the idea is okay, what does each piece do? How does it adjust the graph? And can I do that?